Hello, and welcome to this edition of our podcast here on My CYP 450. Today, our guest is Dr. Michael R.Gray from the Progressive Healthcare Group located in Benson, Arizona. And Dr. Gray is he will be a regular guest here on our podcast. Dr. Gray, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate this very much.
Excellent. So let's, being kind of the initial podcast here on the My CYP 450 podcast channel, and also available on our YouTube channel, mycyp450.org YouTube channel. Tell us about you and your background in 10 words or less. Just kidding. But give us, let us introduce our podcast listeners and viewers to Dr. Michael Gray.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dan. I'm a physician who practices internal medicine and toxicology. I was trained at the University of Cincinnati, where I got my medical degree, and then I went to Cook County Hospital in Chicago. And in the mid-'70s, I spent 4 years there in an internal medicine residency, which was combined with occupational medicine and preventive medicine at the same time. So my training was extensive in that arena, and then I moved over to the University of Arizona College of Medicine in 1978, and I established their training program in occupational and environmental medicine. I taught there for about 3 years, and then I went out to an independent internal medicine practice, which I did in Tucson for 8 years, and I have done now in Benson, Arizona for 34 years. My practice here in Benson includes both internal medicine and toxicology.
You basically have two clinics in Benson. You have a general or internal medicine clinic, and then you have the toxicology clinic. Describe for us those two clinics and how they either are independent or how they might kind of cross over as well.
Sure. Progressive Healthcare Group is a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation which operates in Benson and is known as the Progressive Healthcare Group Clinic. In that clinic, we provide primary care to over 12,000 patients in the San Pedro Valley Hospital District, which is northwestern Cochise County. And we also have reached out to the county more generally. And so our patients come from all over the county for primary care. I also have some patients who come from Tucson to get their primary care in our clinic as well. Most of those patients are channeled into our clinic through the toxicology clinic. So in addition to the primary care, which is carried out by Sean Dorado and Audrey Gray, who is not related to me, but just is employed with me and his namesake. But Audrey and Sean do the bulk of the primary care here under my supervision. I spend the majority of my time seeing patients who present to me with toxicology issues. And those patients include patients from across the country.
That's one of the things that how we came to know each other is through the toxicology clinic. And I think it was probably somewhere around 2012.
Yes.
Yeah, 2012. And so the interesting thing, and I want you to explain a little more about the toxicology clinic, why people are, patients are in the toxicology clinic, what part of medicine, from your perspective, this toxicology clinic, the space that it takes up, and then we'll get into some of the reasons of why. the space is what it is, and why it's becoming more recognized in general medicine.
From the time that I started the occupational environmental toxicology clinical program at university in 1978, a number of my colleagues around the country and I had gotten together and recognized that we were seeing a lot of patients who were reacting to compounds that were toxic, but the concentrations that they were exposed to were extraordinarily small for the response that they were experiencing. And we were puzzling about this, and there was a general consensus among the directors of the occupational medicine training programs across the country that we really needed to look at amplifications systems within the human body to try to unravel why these reactions were going on. So the amplification systems include the immune system, the endocrine system, and the nervous system, because minuscule, stimuli will trigger massive responses, and those three systems are amplifiers. That having been said, it became clear to me as I worked with these patients over a period of many years that there were similarities from patient to patient in terms of the results of audits of their immune system, their endocrine system, and their nervous systems. Number one, the immune system was on one hand hyperactivated and overstimulated and in a pro-inflammatory state, meaning that the white cells of the immune system were basically in an open war with whatever the cells in the immune system were perceiving as non-self invading organisms making non-self proteins. The proteins that are coating these organisms differ from the proteins that are coating our own cells. And so the white cells recognize that there are invaders afoot, and then they mobilize literally armies of cells to come into the area where they found the infectious agent, and their mission is to destroy those things. And that's how we get protected from infection. But there is a circumstance for our chemically challenged patients where something is going amiss. And what that something is that they're retaining a larger concentration of persistent organic petrochemically based pollutants, or POPs, persistent organic pollutants. These are residual traces of waste from the petrochemical industry that humans across the globe have not been able or willing to contain and avoid in terms of their dispersal around the environment. So the result is that all living things on the planet have to deal with our waste. And in doing so, what we are discovering is, of course, that these waste products cause physiologic issues and problems. And as I alluded to, the immune system, the endocrine system, and the nervous system are invariably involved. So the immune system is poised to respond to infection. But these chemical compounds that are carbon structures, or therefore organic compounds, get into our system, attach themselves to proteins like albumin, which is a carrier protein in our blood, and they alter the shape of the protein so that the immune system ends up getting fooled, and it thinks that these proteins that have the pesticides, the plasticizers, the waste products from petrochemical fuels, etc., on the protein molecule, these compounds now look different, and the immune system says, oh my God, these are not self. I got to fight it. And so they mobilize to fight. And they basically trigger the immune system into a battle zone that is pro-inflammatory. Inflammation just means the migration of white cells into a local portion of your body to do battle. It's there to fight and protect you. So now you've launched a battle, and normally once you defeat the organism, the immune system says, okay, I'm done, I can go back to sleep, or I can quiet down. And it ends up in a dormant state. But if you can't get rid of the chemicals themselves that are attaching themselves to your proteins and making them look as if they are not self, you can't stop the process. And because you can't switch it off, because you can't get rid of those chemicals, the inflammatory cascade continues for months to years. And the end result of that is that you are in an inflammatory condition. And being in that condition often will cause another cascade of symptoms: fever, chills, sweats, pain associated with the area in which the inflammation is going on, or a variety of side effects of compounds referred to as cytokines. Cytokines are compounds that the immune system makes to coordinate the activities of the armies of cells. These cytokines, histamine, leukotriene, interferon, tumor necrosis factor, human transforming growth factor beta 1, ... There are literally hundreds of them. But the ones that we audit show something in common, and that is that they're increased. And the reason that the cytokines increase is because there's more activity going on involving the white cells that are poised and organized now to do battle. So the cytokines create side effects. The histamine can make you tired. It can cause you to have rashes. And so that's one set of issues. You've got the pro-inflammatory condition switched on, and it's just racing along. So if this is happening because these small carbon structures, usually with a molecular weight below 500, these compounds are the triggers to the inflammatory symptoms. So it isn't rocket science that says that, gee, if the poison is causing a problem, let's get rid of the poison. Let's get the poison out of your system. Let's figure out if we have a way to extract the toxins, because if I can get them out of your fluids, then maybe the immune system, which lives in those fluids, can quiet down. And in fact, we do that, and we'll talk about that in a little greater detail in another one of our podcasts. But for the moment, let me just say that if we put a filter through your small intestine that doesn't get absorbed into the body, but is just there to grab positively charged small organic molecules, which include all of the poisons, then we have a chance to switch off the inflammatory cascade that's going on throughout the rest of your body. And that's exactly what we do. And as I said, we'll describe it in greater detail, but we use charcoal and clay to act as these filters and pull these materials out of your fluids. And now we are creating a concentration gradient between the fluids that are bathing your cells and the cells themselves and the fat stores around the body, in which we will also find the poisons at roughly the same level that they are in the fluids that you just cleaned with your charcoal and your clay. That's a different project. That's a different process. It takes a lot longer to get the poisons out of your cells and out of your fat stores than it does to get it out of the fluids, because the fluids are moving into and out of the small intestine, and we can put a filter there. We don't have a way to filter what's in the cells, but we do have a way to create a concentration gradient. So if you have a high concentration inside the cells and you have a low or no concentration in the fluid space, what's up here is going to spill out into that fluid space, and then it's going to present itself in the gut. to be filtered. So this is basically a process that's a long-term process, and it takes months to years to empty out what you've spent your entire life storing. So I guess one of the questions is, how do I know that you have these things in you? Well, let's start at the beginning.
And what are those things? So
Sure.
what are those environmental toxic exposures? The materials, the
That's funny you should ask that, because I was just about to tell you. The cord blood of newborn babies is actually sampled at birth. And the Centers for Disease Control has been publishing results from a task force charged with the task of evaluating what kind of poisons are present in our babies. And of course, to me, it's rather a horrendous thought. I mean, why would we be poisoning our babies? I mean, we're not a mean population. What are we doing?
Right.
And so the answer is really rather startling. Newborn babies' cord blood samples average 287 poisons that are detectable, measurable, and identifiable. When I heard that just a few years ago, it literally sent a shudder through my entire body. 287 toxins. Our babies are born this way. And of those toxins, 215 are neurotoxins. 205 can cause birth defects, and 189 can cause cancer. If our babies are poisoned and they're carrying this in the fluids of their body, it's got to be in the mother. If it's in the mother and it's in the baby, it's also in the fathers. Folks, none of us escape, because persistent organic pollutants are carbon-based structures that are waste products from the petrochemical industry around the world. And they include our fuel, our lubricants, our synthetic compounds, all of which derive from basic petroleum. And our chemistry industries convert it to things that we use in many different ways, but not without waste. And unfortunately, the big chemical companies around the world are not being regulated. They're driven by their unyielding, incessant demand for more profit. Sell more, make more. Sell more, make more. And gee, I can sell a lot more if you guys will just stop regulating me and telling me all the things I cannot do. If you would watch an industry truly be regulated so that we don't create an increased burden of persistent organic pollutants, there is a way out of this situation. And just in case we think that it's not possible, I would refer you to the maps that were shown and the images that were taken from the satellites over China in the first quarter of 2020. The COVID epidemic forced them to shut down their industries and effect a quarantine, during which time people didn't leave their homes except for extraordinary needs. Everybody in the country wore masks when they did go out of their protected environment, and they coined a term and developed a method called social distancing.
Are there similarities in what a COVID, somebody who's experiencing COVID, the symptoms of that, and similarities to the exposure symptoms of somebody that has the cumulative organic chemical hypertoxicity condition? Are there similarities there?
There are similarities because in both cases, the immune system is being brought into play to try to solve the problem. And so the immune system becomes activated. And if it stays activated for a really prolonged period of time, one could argue that it is in a hyperactivated state. And almost all of my chemically challenged patients who tend to retain the persistent organic pollutants because of deficiencies in their detox enzyme array, they're holding on to these and they act as a continuing trigger of an immune response. COVID, the virus, or any other virus, when it is present, is going to do the same thing. It's going to stimulate the immune system, and armies of cells will be mobilized to fight. And in the process, they release cytokines, and we have spoken a bit about the cytokine storm that happens in a small percentage of COVID's cases, but that ends up causing those patients to die because it literally destroys their lungs. So you now have an extremely intense acute cytokine cascade in the COVID patient with the potential for doing damage. For my chemically challenged patients, every time they get exposed to an environmental trigger, they too experience a cytokine cascade. And that cytokine cascade increases the concentration of cytokines in the fluids, and those trigger symptoms. Now, I do want to touch on one thing. The symptoms of inflammation, fever, chills, sweats, headaches, joint pains, muscle aches, etc., are basically an immune response. My chemically challenged patients are also simultaneously dealing with immune suppression because a portion of the cells are not replicating as rapidly as they should, and so do have the potential for vulnerability to infectious agents. And yes, all of my chemically challenged patients are simultaneously immune suppressed at some level, some very much so, some not so much. But the important message is this: every element in the treatment protocol that we have published and that we use to treat our chemically challenged patients, which is aimed at removing the poisons, mitigating the damage with high concentrations of antioxidants, and overcoming the deficits in energy production, all of those things enhance their immune function. So my primary message is, if you are chemically challenged, do your protocol. Make sure that at least twice a day, you're taking all of the elements in the protocol.
And I want to mention too that the protocol we have posted on mycyp450.org for people to go to, and all you have to do is scroll down just a bit and you'll see it there for download. It's free, it's there, easy to download and to access and to review and to use freely as people see fit. But it's there, and so that's one of the things about our website, is to make a lot of this information that we talk about here on the podcast and that we also talk about in our video series on our YouTube channel, Doc, Clinical Environmental Toxicology Today, which we want to encourage everybody to go to the YouTube channel as well and watch a number of, I think we have 21 or 22 videos on there now. We're adding new videos every so often. COVID has kind of slowed us down a little bit, but that's a great resource place for you to go and get new information, get information about the chemically challenged aspects of health, and also COVID information as well. Doc, we've got a lot of things that we need to cover in this podcast series, but I think today's podcast has been really, really beneficial. A lot of things that we've talked about today, various things. We'll get into more detail on a lot of the things that we've talked about today, as you've alluded to earlier. But I think in this time with, we're doing a lot of things virtually, as we are now with the podcast. And it's just a great way to keep connected to the people that need help, information, like with mycyp450.org. We're here to educate, inform, and empower people that have health conditions that are influenced by genetics, lifestyle, and environmental factors. And you do such excellent work in that area, as I know personally from family members that are under your care. Why are these conditions? Why does somebody have this condition? Why does somebody not have the condition? Why is somebody more affected and not affected, less affected? I mean, we can, walk into an environmental, hazard, and somebody could come out of it and not feel affected, while somebody's affected for weeks, days, and or weeks, and possibly longer. So I look forward to those conversations. Anything that you'd like to say in parting before we wrap up this first podcast in the series, Doc?
I just want to thank our viewers for visiting and subscribing to the channel and to the podcasts. I do believe that education and information are the key to having the power to changing the circumstances in which we live. And I think the primary, most important thing and message that I can give to you is the following. It's very clear from the work that I have done now, we didn't speak a lot about it today, that energy production in an aerobic manner, which basically means that we're taking oxygen molecules that have dissolved in the fluids that move around our body and using each oxygen atom to generate 17 times more energy by bringing it through a series of reactions that we call oxidative phosphorylation, or more simply, aerobic metabolism. You may remember, and I would refer you to the early video, 3.5 minutes of Mae Jemison, where she describes the importance of aerobic metabolism and what it did for life on this planet. Mm-hmm. I want to remind you that she pointed out that 2 billion years ago, there was a genetic transformation in a bacterial species that allowed it suddenly to use oxygen by running it through the electron transport chain, or a sequence called aerobic metabolism. When that happened, it suddenly gave living forms huge amounts of energy. And that energy has been harnessed to make every complex organism on this planet above the complexity of bacteria. So, if what I'm telling you is that we are poisoning mitochondria in ourselves, and we're doing it with the poisons that we are proliferating through the entire world, we are very gradually accelerating the sixth great extinction of complex life on this planet. And if we do not do something soon, within a matter of 3 to 5 years, to reverse this process, we will destroy life of any significant complexity, and we will return the earth to the bacteria from which we arose.
Doc, I want to thank you for your time today, and look forward to our next podcast, which will be produced relatively quickly. And thanks so much for spending some of your day with us and sharing your wealth of knowledge in this area of our health that can be so complex and confusing at times. And especially, in times like we're in presently with, a pandemic and all, it just, it's a difficult course to navigate our lives in a normal, or what we used to know as a normal situation. Now, when you add a pandemic to it, it just makes it, I'm sure our podcast viewers and listeners, we all feel a little bit the same. It's a little more challenging today than it was a few months ago. And you certainly help us see a clearer path through this navigation, and I really, really appreciate that, and really look forward to doing more of these podcasts with you and for your contribution to helping us all understand more and better.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate you very much for organizing and hosting this podcast series.
Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you on the next podcast right here on at my CYP 450 and our podcast outlets and our YouTube channel. Thanks so much.